For more, we've got Ihsan Gardi joining us. He is with the National Council of Canadian Muslims. He is coming to us from our studios today in Quebec City. Following this, Ihsan, good to have you with us. Your reaction to this change of plea?
Well, thank you for having me on, Todd. I think the reaction is obviously that this has been a very emotional day and very much of a roller coaster experience for the families of the victims and the survivors. I think that the prevailing sentiment is really a feeling of relief and one that, will mean that the families and the survivors will not have to, they'll be spared the experience and the ordeal of going through a 6 to 8 week trial where they would be forced to relive moment by moment the horrific events of 1 year ago on January 29th of last year. There's a real sense of relief that that won't have to happen. And there's a hope as well, I believe, that today's plea by Mr. Bissonnette and the finding of guilt in the first-degree murder charges will really provide some comfort and some closure to these families who have experienced immeasurable grief and anguish at the killing of their loved ones and the attempted killing of several others.
Ihsan, you're normally based in Ottawa, but you traveled to Quebec City to be there in the court. What was the atmosphere like?
Well, the atmosphere was, tense. There was a sense that, there was certainly an announcement going to be made or some developments that were going to be made. The proceedings started on Monday, and there was a publication ban. There was a sense that they would be experiencing or witnessing something that would be quite significant in terms of a development. And obviously, once the publication ban was lifted, we all found out about how the plea had changed from not guilty on Monday, when Mr. Bissonnette had, without any hesitation to each of the charges as they were read out by the judge, pleaded not guilty, only to come back later in the afternoon on Monday to say that he was guilty, and he accepted that. And then we had a recess of a day and a half where the judge ordered him to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. And again, after that psychiatric evaluation was completed, the psychiatrist in the court today told the judge and that in his assessment, Mr. Bissonnette understood the consequences of his actions and was of sound mind in making this decision. So it was really a very tense environment and wondering what was going to happen when Mr. Bissonnette pleaded guilty in front of many of the families who had not been able to attend on Monday as well. You could sense a sense of the relief. Some individuals were weeping and being consoled by their families and their friends. And really, it was quite an emotional ride.
Ihsan, you and I have had a number of conversations over the years on this program and elsewhere about the issue of Islamophobia. Alexandre Bissonnette read from a statement asking for forgiveness, and he said very clearly that in his mind he's not a terrorist and he's not Islamophobic, and yet he did what he did. What's the reaction from the community to those words?
Well, he said he was not an Islamophobe and he said he was not a terrorist, but he also followed on to say as well that his actions were because he was carried away by fear and an overwhelming sense of despair. Well, fear and hatred, that forms part of what Islamophobia is. And let's look at the facts as well, Todd. He went into a mosque and he was charged and pled guilty to first-degree murder, which means intent. So he could have chosen anywhere to go, but he chose a mosque, and he chose to shoot unarmed worshippers in the back while they were praying. I think that the facts speak for themselves, and we have to look as well at the history as well. We know from, for example, his social media postings that he was expressing anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant sentiment online as well. So for him to say that, it's obviously very difficult to hear, and I think that many people are not going to put a lot of weight on those words.
Where does the conversation surrounding the issue of Islamophobia, a bigger picture, Ihsan, where does it go from here, from this horrific case?
Well, I think that this case has highlighted the worst manifestation and expression of Islamophobia. Our organization and others have independently noted the rise of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment across the country, from various polls that have come out in recent years to data from Statistics Canada, which has showed that hate crimes targeting Muslims between the years of 2012 and 2015 increased by 253%. And it's coming at a time where we see as well the rise of right-wing extremism. So there's a lot of things happening at the same time, and it is very concerning. And I think it's important to recognize that Islamophobia doesn't just affect Muslims, it affects people perceived to be Muslims as well. So it is a multifaceted issue and a multifaceted phenomenon, and that means it's going to take more than just the Muslim community's efforts to address it. We need the help of law enforcement, government, educators. Media has a role to play as well in terms of how Muslims and Islam are discussed in the public discourse. As they say, media both mirrors as well as manufactures what's in the public squares. So there's a role for everybody to play here, and I think it's important that we recognize that this is not something that will be fixed or solved overnight, but it's something that we have to pull together as Canadians to address it as a form of hatred and xenophobia, just as we have to address all forms of hatred.
An important conversation to have. Ihsan Gardi, Executive Director of the National Council of Canadian Muslims, today in Quebec City for this trial playing out here with Alexandre Bissonnette switching his plea from not guilty to guilty. Ihsan, always good to have you on CTV. Thank you for this today.
Thank you, Todd.